So first of all, welcome to our house. This is Zumo. Zumo is a kind of Edinburgh-based crypto organisation. I think we've had a little bit of the spiel of what Zumo is and does, but I'll just go into a little bit more detail. So I'll give you a brief intro into Zumo. So we're a crypto infrastructure business, so we sell that as our software that we give to different organisations. So I suppose if you're thinking about where we were on the list, then we're definitely more on the application side, the business application side. So think of us as you got your banks, you got your fintechs. If they want to do a bit of dabbling of offering crypto to their customer base, we've got some applications that you can just plug and play straight into it. Gives you access to custodial, non-custodial wallets and access to the exchanges as well. One of the things with Zumo as well, we have this infrastructure, but we use in the Microsoft term, I know that might make people scream, but we eat our own dog food, that we actually have a B2C app as well. So we've got around 65,000 users that are on our app too. So when we go into these large organisations, we can say, yes, our technology definitely does work, because it powers all of these guys. So myself, I am the Chief Data Analytics Officer. I have spoken to a few of you already. I am not a blockchain native. I'm still learning the ropes. So this talk today isn't necessarily all about blockchain itself, but it's more about the application and what it is that we're actually using it for. So this slide here is a little bit more into kind of like what we offer for Zumo, but kind of one of the big parts and the part that I look after myself is this bit at the bottom, which is the decarbonisation proposition for our digital assets. So what do I actually mean then? So we go in and we talk to these banks and these fintechs, and we like crypto-ish. We'd like to offer it-ish, but gosh, there is a really kind of bad side that some of our investors really talk about whenever they're wanting to put money into crypto, which is obviously it's got quite a large carbon footprint. And you will be very kind of aware that this, especially Bitcoin, is got a very sort of bad press of Bitcoin's energy is it's 160 odd terawatt hours worth of energy, and these are sort of like some of the big kind of headline grabbing headlines that you see. Now we all know not all blockchains are equal, but however, I suppose if you think about all the banks and the fintechs, they're usually going in for crypto, and the first one that they'll be looking at is Bitcoin. So it's kind of most of this is really kind of addressing the issue with Bitcoin rather than all of the different networks there. And when you think about kind of these big institutions, there's a lot now which is coming around disclosures on kind of how they operate themselves as a business. So you've got a number of these kind of different regulations that are coming through now. So, you know, your big banks have to say kind of what is their carbon footprint. And this here is just like a kind of, you know, a bit of an edited highlight. It's not all of the different regulations in the different regions, but this is kind of some of them that are coming through. But this is like for kind of big risk officers in these large organisations. They've got to have their ESG strategy. They've got to at least have an understanding of what their footprint is, and they have to be kind of demonstrating they're doing something about it. So really, when it comes to crypto, then what do you do in that space? Now, obviously, crypto is somewhat of a kind of, you know, it's a new technology, and we've actually got an opportunity now to really sort of like lead the way with investments, especially because, you know, we've got an opportunity to show that investing in this is actually kind of quite a good thing. So the first part of it, then, you've got this sustainability disclosure reporting. So the first stage on that, you've got to measure it. Right, so the measuring that you use, especially most kind of, if you have a look at ESG reports for, like I said, the big financial institutes or kind of any organisation really, the E side is usually based on the greenhouse gas protocol, which was kind of set up quite a while ago now. So we're looking now for a new iteration of the greenhouse gas protocol. It didn't deal with digital assets specifically. But however, in the greenhouse gas protocol, you kind of report under these different framework headings. So you've got the first one here, which is like your scope 1, which is basically the carbon and other emissions that you sort of release as for the heating and lighting of your own companies. And the scope 2 here then, that's kind of, it's quite specific, but it's to do with kind of any energy that's related to kind of heating or cooling. And then everything else kind of goes into this scope 3. So you've got things like, you know, your business travel, you've got your capital goods like your laptops and your servers and things. And then it's also kind of, you know, like, you know, your leased assets and end of life activity. So these are under these kind of big 3 scopes. And I suppose, like, let's just take it away from blockchain to give you a little bit of an example. So this one here is Unilever. Now, Unilever is pretty decent when it comes to some of their disclosure reporting. They're quite sort of forward thinking. And this Unilever, if you're not kind of aware, you might just think it's sort of one thing, but they do an awful lot of these kind of different brands here. So everything from Persil to Ben & Jerry's ice cream to Cornettos and Dove and all that kind of stuff. So this is the breakdown of their different scope reporting. And as you can see, scope 1 and 2 is teeny, tiny, weeny. Whereas scope 3 actually makes up the majority. And that's usually the case in a lot of organisations. So Zumo has always had sustainability at its heart, and ever since kind of inception, we were trying to do things that would kind of, we would understand what our impact was, and then we would try and mitigate it or try and do something about it. So we started having a look at our emissions back in 2021. And so we started having a look under all of these different headings, and obviously we went and got a lot of financial data. We used kind of like the best sort of accounting methods that you can do for working out what your carbon footprint. But when it came to our supply chain, which essentially for us as this organisation with the 65,000 users, how do we measure our share of that Bitcoin electricity consumption? Because that's obviously quite a large part of our activity. And back in 2021, like I said, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, it has nothing around digital assets. There wasn't a huge amount there, any kind of support. We found that we were somewhat lone in our pursuits at this time. So what do you do, like this meetup here? You come and you join community, don't you? So one of the first things that we did is that we got involved with the Crypto Climate Accord, and we were one of the first signatories on that. So that was a lot of people who were talking about the environmental impact, especially of the Bitcoin mining. We then started thinking, right, well, it's got to be a data-driven thing because, you know, there's Vicky, she loves data. So what do we do with the data and what sort of methodologies? So we started putting some of our own methodologies out there. So we put them out as white papers. We were very kind of transparent about what we were doing. So there's a couple of white papers that you can see that we were involved in, getting involved with then. And then the final one we've got there, which was we started getting to some kind of really interesting guys who were doing some really interesting research in this space. So particularly the University of Cambridge, the Centre for Alternative Finance, and also these guys here, sorry, I'll move out of the way, which are CCRI, so the Crypto Climate Reporting Institute, and the South Pole. So all of us guys were all trying to work out what's the best methodology to make it a consistent view of the network. So where we all kind of came to a rough consensus, which is great. So then we started having a look at what our reporting was. And here you can see the breakdown of what our impact was. Now, this is 2021. Obviously, we've done this multiple times now, but this was the slide I had to hand today. So as you can see, the cryptocurrencies are like a massive part of our overall footprint. So we've measured it, but then now what? You've got to mitigate against it. So this is kind of like the next section. So again, I'll go back to the Unilever example because it's kind of, that's an interesting one to again do a bit of comparing and contrasting. So we saw before we had the lovely big pie chart with just that 2% of the scope 1 and 2. And now this is actually just breaking down its scope 3. Now in here, you can see like there's a little bit that's coloured in here. This bit, white bit here, is kind of Unilever saying there's really not a lot we can do about it. So it's not actually part of their net zero strategy to do anything with a huge big chunk of it because it's just too difficult. But this is some of the areas that they are addressing. And as you can see, it's full of sort of really quite interesting stuff. Like, I think my favourite here is the one on this one, the retail emissions. So 10% of their scope 3 is based on the fridges that are in all of the supermarkets and kind of getting, you know, sort of the ice cream from the Ben & Jerry's factory to your door. So you can see that when organisations are trying to do that mitigation activity, they've got to think of strategies of all of these different things. There's even stuff within there which is like working with the farmers to try and reduce the fertilisers, or so that they can reduce kind of what impact it is from the milk that's actually going into the ice cream. So these types of supply chain activity is actually really, really quite difficult. So while theirs is difficult, what about ours? So we know that in the main, okay, there's a little bit of like hardware and kit that's going on. But if you actually think about the blockchain, the primary footprint is really actually driven by electricity, because it's just all of the compute that's needed to keep the network going, and obviously solving and mining for that particular Bitcoin. And the thing is, with electricity, we actually know how to decarbonise electricity, because we've got this wonderful thing, which I was chatting to some young gentleman, Alistair, wasn't it? Yeah, about renewables. We've got wind, we've got solar, we've got hydro, for example. And the thing is, if we can maybe show that if we are using more of these types of renewable sources, then it actually is quite a push into the renewable energy sector. So what goes from Bitcoin's making the world burn to Bitcoin could potentially be pushing a lot into renewables actually sort of changes a little bit of that narrative. So how do we go about doing that? So this is a bit of a busy slide, but essentially if you're kind of focused on the picture on this side, so renewable energy, when you've got your wind farms, for example, you have the actual electricity that's generated, but you also have a market instrument which is called a renewable energy certificate. Now, when you go into kind of grids that have got particular targets, you kind of bundle these things together, and then you maybe sell it to like Octopus Energy so that they can offer green tariffs and to all of their customers. But not every country has got like grid targets, and there's a lot of other countries that are doing an awful lot of solar. But once the electricity goes into the grid, you can't go, well, that's green electricity and that isn't green electricity. So these market instruments are actually quite a useful thing to use, especially if there's countries that don't actually have that kind of that grid focus anyway. So these can be sold independently, and they are kind of a verified and well-renowned kind of market instrument on their own. And if you buy these renewable energy certificates, you can actually make a claim to say the electricity that you're using is actually sort of mitigated because you've actually invested into the renewables, the renewable infrastructure. So that's essentially what we do. We've got an understanding now then of kind of what our share is, and we can measure that in the megawatt hours that our customer base is responsible for. And then we have the ability then to buy the renewable energy certificates. And we work with an organisation who then mint and tokenise these as well. So we've got the actual additional kind of transparency, that was the word I was struggling for, transparency to say like this is actually what we're doing as an organisation, because we can then sort of put the calculation and this particular purchase, and we can put that on chain and then kind of give that information to our stakeholders as well. So that's kind of currently what we're doing. But as you can see, that this was quite a long journey from 2020 when we really started thinking about like our sustainability pledges, and then started going through our measurements. So when we got to round about sort of March in 2022, we got some funding through from Innovate UK to actually develop this out, because whilst it was useful for us, we would talk to a lot of organisations. So if you think about these large ETFs that are all now kind of currently in the news, everyone's kind of thinking, well, this is actually quite a useful thing to do, and maybe this might be something that we could add to our current ESG strategy, and it addresses then our crypto. So when those investors are wanting to know what our mitigation strategy is, this could be something that could plug in. So we started developing this out, and then last year we officially launched our product. And we were behind the first European Bitcoin ETF that was launched last year in August. So luckily we've won a couple of awards with that, which we won't brag about, but I will brag about them. So this is Oxygen. So this is a product now that we're developing. So I'm the product manager for it because it's a data product. And essentially, it's kind of made up of these three elements. So first of all, you kind of come to us and say, I've got a particular holding, or I'm looking at this amount of either, we do actually for about sort of 15 different tokens and currencies. So we can give you what your carbon footprint is and your share of the network. Then we kind of put you then in touch with renewable energy certificate providers, so these tokenized providers. But if you don't want to go down that route, we've also got an option for you to go down the carbon credit route as well. So you can then mitigate dependent on what your ESG strategy is. And then this prove then part is then you're allowed to put both of those things together and then go, well, actually, guys, look, we're fully transparent. This is what we're mitigating against, and this is what we are doing to address it. And so that's essentially what Oxygen is in a nutshell. And that's where I will finish. So thank you very much.